Welcome. So great to be with you all in this room full of wisdom, experience, expertise, and insights. Can you all hear me okay? It feels okay. Just in the back, can you all hear me okay? I'm not sure what's on microphone or what's coming through, so let me know if you have any problem and I'll try to share loudly. Well, it's really a pleasure to be with you today to share with you a framework that a colleague of mine and I developed to facilitate and design Oregon Shared Services Framework. And it's grounded in the principle of engaging providers in that process so that we are co-creating a design and a framework that builds out a shared services framework. So this is a framework that we used in Oregon about 1.5 years ago. We started, and now we are we're facilitating a co-design team here in Austin. And this is a framework that has been adapted and used in Iowa. So I think we had an Iowa person here. Yeah, oh, yes, we've talked on the phone, yes. So let me share, before we dive into this framework and a little bit about this work, let me just share a little bit about myself and why I'm here. I lead a consulting practice focused on supporting organizations, teams, and leaders really strive towards impactful outcomes through their programs, their policies. Oftentimes it's how they work together, how they work collectively together and accomplish a goal together, which we know is where really the magic juice is. I came into this work with deep roots in early care and education. When I was 5, my mom started a family childcare program. I was a kid who grew up waking up to kids coming in at 6:30 in the morning. And later my mom grew the program and turned it into a center, and my family moved into another home. But let me tell you, we spent every single weekend cleaning, painting, weeding, you name it. And let me tell you, to this day, I hate weeding. I love gardens, but I will not weed them. So thanks, Mom. Following in my mom's footsteps 25 years ago, I became the director of a childcare center of a mid-sized program that had a capacity of about 67 children. We served infants and toddlers and a high number of children on state subsidy. I partnered very closely with our local neighboring elementary school, and matter of fact, opened up classrooms in 4 elementary schools in my community as a way to try to grow and become sustainable financially. I really partnered with our neighboring elementary school so that we could leverage the care and support we were giving children and families, because we were serving the same children and families. I can vividly remember, gosh, standing right outside that elementary school and wishing I had the financial stability and infrastructure that that school had. Just standing there, wow. And on particular that day, that was a day I had to approach and ask several of my staff to wait to deposit their payroll checks so that I could go track down tuition, because we couldn't cover payroll. And unfortunately, that happened fairly often. And all I could think of was, gosh, I am a terrible business manager. I'm sure I must be the only one who can't figure out how to make this work. Fast forward 15 years, and because of the fire in my belly from that situation and many more like that, I moved into policy development, working at the state, and I was serving at the time as the director of the Commission for Childcare, and was invited by our Oregon Community Foundation and our childcare division director to talk about strategies, financial strategies to sustain childcare with Louise Stoney. This is 2011. When I heard Louise share that what they were seeing is that programs that are serving under 100 children and are serving infants and toddlers can't pencil out. And for the first time, here we are 15 years later, for the first time I realized it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me that was this terrible business manager like I thought I was. And while I knew there was something seriously wrong all along with how the system of childcare was financed and supported, gosh, it felt so good to know it wasn't just me. And more importantly, there are many others out there struggling that need these solutions that we're all here talking about today. As the pandemic began, as you all know, the shutdown of childcare programs began in Oregon. It really shined the light on the systemic issues of financial fragility and instability of childcare. It was like this big spotlight shined a light on this issue that we all know exists. The Oregon Community Foundation reached out with a request to myself to design, and my colleague Megan Irwin, to design a process that would lead to a plan, a framework to support and sustain childcare programs. So my colleague Megan and I, she's a consultant and also now a former early learning division director. We set out and designed an approach to engage providers and childcare partners to co-design, to come together to co-design a shared services framework that could be scaled statewide. The Oregon Community Foundation generously funded the planning phase of the co-design team, and then with the philanthropy funding from Ford Family Foundation, and then also later our state's early learning division, funded the launch of 3 pilot regions this past year with the goal to scale over the next 5 years. It's a little bit of an ambitious goal, but got to set ambitious goals sometimes. So I'd like to share with you the kind of the underlying philosophy that serves and guides our work. When I saw this definition by Brene Brown, how many of you here know Brene Brown? Oh my gosh, I've never seen a handful like that. Handful of words. Brene, as you know, she's known as a researcher and a storyteller. And in 2018, she released her Dare to Lead program after a 10-year study on leadership. And before the pandemic, I graciously had the privilege of being trained by her to facilitate her Dare to Lead leadership program. So I love to stand strong in many of her quotes. But when I saw this quote, anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential, it really connected with me. One, because it's what I saw amazing, great leaders around me doing. They were finding the potential in people and processes and had the courage to develop that potential. And then secondly, it connected with me because I wanted this to be an intention that I used as a guide in the work that I do as a facilitator and a consultant. In addition, Megan and I like to think a lot about sort of how policy is generated. And as many of you know, traditional policy and systems work leans heavily on academic research. It leans heavily on evidence-based programs and experts, and often at the expense of excluding the voices of those doing the work and those impacted by the work. And so our philosophy and our approach to facilitation and community engagement systems work really seeks to flip the power structure, to center the wisdom and lived experiences of those directly impacted in a way that would place childcare providers and policymakers with institutional power in shared leadership roles. So this is really our foundation that kind of led to us designing a framework that we hope you'll carry with you. Our hope was to really center the lived experience and wisdom and expertise as we design this approach. So we're going to walk through this framework and approach with you, and then we'll close out with just a few basic facilitation tips that I think are really important in facilitating a process that engages individuals, in particular providers. And my hope is we'll have some Q&A or maybe some small group discussions so that we can really learn from the shared experience in this room today. All right. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm going to walk us through a framework of kind of an 8-meeting framework. It could be 10, it could be more, it could be less. This framework is something that would need to be adapted for every community given their current context, their goals, their hopes, their needs, their resources. So in our particular framework, we suggested identifying 12 to 15 co-design team members. You can easily go more. I know there are up to 20. It just gets a little challenging sometimes to make decisions and to really elevate the voices of each member on a team when it gets too much larger. So that's kind of where we started. And you'll see here that we're really looking for, and this is in partnership with funders and sponsors of the work that we do, looking to for the members on the co-design team to bring the voice of the childcare community to the process, to bring the voice of the community, are respected by the childcare community, represent the diversity of the childcare community, and really understand and know how childcare programs function, whether it's licensing, quality improvement processes, and it has an interest and also is available to, has some time to contribute to the process, and has an ability to identify challenges for the community, is collaborative and is interested and willing in using technology. I want to also acknowledge that the providers on the co-design team, in the processes we've been involved with, highly suggest and we're supported to pay the providers just like any other consultant on a coming together to do this work. So I'm going to walk us through the scope and sequence of 8 meetings and kind of what we did in each meeting. But this is the high level summary of what we did as a result of the framework. One, start off articulating your vision, your commitment to providers to developing a vision. Analyzing and choosing a childcare management software system, developing criteria and scores and core skills for a network of coaches. So you've got your vision, your criteria that you'd like to use to choose a childcare management software system, your criteria for coaches and what those coaches would do. And then your set of core services. What are the core things you want to be part of your alliance? And then to help design a strategy for listing how many number of providers you would like to set out to list, what you feel like is realistic and doable given how many regions you're going to be starting in, and then pursuing funding. Let's see here. Okay, so just going to walk us through these and then we'll pause. But feel free if you have questions, if you want to pause me, go ahead and stop. Just raise your hand, I can see you. So you'll see in how we mapped out each of the meeting series is we generally have a set of goals, a deliverable, a set of questions that we're going to walk through a facilitated dialogue with the providers and the childcare partners, with the co-design team. Sometimes there's learning materials, and then sometimes there's post-meeting work, which is usually a survey. And we like to employ a survey when we're making decisions or establishing criteria because it provides another venue to provide feedback and to engage provider voice who may, you might leave a meeting and have thoughts about it afterwards. And so we want to provide an in-between process. So for this first meeting, you'll see here it was really grounded in, of course, building relationships with one another and articulating our commitment, the co-design team's commitments to providers, developing a shared understanding of the project, having working agreements for how they wanted to work together, and then agreeing on a decision-making approach. How are we going to make decisions? Developing shared understanding and a common working definition of shared services and core services typically provided. So for example, in this first one, developing a commitment to providers, an example that might come out of a discussion around that when we're asking the co-design team, what commitments do you want to make to providers throughout this work, throughout this project? An example might be something like keeping children, working parents, and providers at the center of our design work, or focusing on equity and ensuring that the needs of historically and currently marginalized communities are considered first in our decision-making. Another example might be holding the voices and perspectives of our fellow childcare providers at the center of our decision-making. So we brainstorm a list. We'll brainstorm a list of what's really important to you, that you want to stay committed to providers as we design a framework for shared services and as shared services is offered to providers. And then we dive into working agreements. How do you want to, in our work together, and in our work together, focusing on where we'll focus collaboratively on sharing our perspectives and our lived experiences with each other, honestly and openly. What do you need from each other? What do we need together to succeed? And so examples of collective commitments to each other might be keeping equity at the core of our work, asking open-ended questions to really understand one another's perspectives, with the understanding we all come from a different history and set of experiences. Another example might be, let's check for consensus and understanding of each topic before we move forward. Let's do a check. Another example might be, let's stay curious in our responses to one another and assume positive intent. So those are just some examples of working agreements, commitments to providers. We always propose a consensus decision-making approach. Oftentimes we use a 4-step approach, which is, I agree, I absolutely love this idea. I agree with reservations, meaning I'm okay with this idea, but I got reservations. I'm going to step back. I can't support this proposal, but I don't want to stop or slow the process. Or then block. I can't support this proposal and we need to find a new one. Let's start over. We often use a consensus model like that for decision making. And then again, in that first meeting, really like to spend some time on developing a shared understanding of shared services. We sort of like to think about it as shared services 101. Because I don't know about you, but it took me about a solid year to really get what does this whole shared services thing look like. And so for us to all come up to speed and get on the same page about what shared services is and what it could look like, we really need to spend some time. So generally have kind of a presentation, provide some information, and then just have a conversation. What here looks valuable? What do you think is going to impact providers the most? What gives you the most? What gives you concern? Get out those concerns. Let's talk about it. And then we often leave the discussion within your own words. How would you describe what a shared services alliance is? We often do a small group breakout or pair share and say, to practice with each other, describe what it is. It's just, again, trying to really gain that shared understanding. So you'll see here some learning materials. We like to pull as much as we can from the Opportunities Exchange website, things like the Shared Services Startup Guide, understanding the Iron Triangles. So just some really great documents on their website we share with the group in advance for those who want to spend time diving in prior. Okay. Meeting 2, we start diving into defining what core services and metrics the co-design team wants to aim towards. So starting a conversation around business metrics, core services, and asking that core question based on the Iron Triangle, based on the Shared Services Startup Guide. What business services and supports will be most beneficial to providers? What's going to have the greatest impact? Have a brainstorm discussion around what's going to really change as a result of these services. What services could be provided for all provider types? What must be targeted specific services for certain provider types? So when we talk about core services, we really kind of drill down into focusing on core services and emphasizing with the co-design team, what are services that can be centralized to achieve economies of scale or economies of expertise? So what can be centralized, and what are some services that you do as providers that are repetitive and maybe could be easily automated and can be completed virtually? So what can be lifted off your plate because it might be able to be automated or completed virtually? So we really focus in on kind of some of those business practices that will save time and save money. Really kind of start asking people that question. Let's focus in on those supports. So things like examples of core services that often come up are invoicing and fee collection. Gosh, the example of me tracking down parents to pay their tuition so staff can cash their check. You know, an automated invoicing and fee collection. HR supports. Many programs don't have any access to human resource supports or legal counsel related. Accounting and financial management supports, document and paperwork organization, marketing and enrollment support. Core concepts, core services typically start to emerge from that conversation. So then you get a set of criteria that emerges. One of the recent ones that came up is regulatory navigational support and communication. So how can an alliance keep us informed about regulation changes? So we have to go looking for it. Things like that recently surfaced. So then what we, you'll see here, a post-meeting work would be that we will then ask the co-design team over a week period of time before our next meeting to go and vote on the core set of services and business metrics that they brainstorm. So the brainstorm, my colleague and I will organize it into sort of a proposal and put up a doodle survey and ask everyone to go and vote. And add in if they have additional thoughts since we last met. So again, just another venue and a way for us to get consensus and agreement. And then we come back the next meeting, we bring up the vote, what was kind of identified electronically, share that with the co-design team and give everybody an opportunity to again finalize the vote of that particular decision. So again, core decisions, commitments to providers. Next decision is core set of services that this co-design team really wants to have in their alliance. And then we start again moving into the next things. The third meeting, we start talking about criteria for childcare management software system. We finalize the core services. And then we really start talking about the criteria for that CCMS. So let's see here. Asking questions to providers like, what are the functionalities that are most important providers for providers? What kinds of supports and trainings will providers need to access an automated software system? So for example, some of the criteria that emerges, and I actually, full disclosure, will say that Opportunities Exchange has a really wonderful grid that maps out categorization of criteria, and then all the childcare management software systems that check off or meet that particular criteria. So we typically will share that with a co-design team. So it provides a little bit of a guide, so we aren't sort of out here in this, like, I don't know what any childcare management software system does. We start with a grounding, a foundation of what some of those basic core services are. So some of those examples might be like marketing and enrollment. This is something a childcare management software system does and can do. Bill invoicing and fee collection through electronic invoicing and fee collection. Data sharing. Do they offer technical assistance and coaching? Is this childcare management system offered in languages other than English? Some of those core questions and criteria start to emerge from this brainstorm discussion around childcare management software criteria. So based on the criteria that the co-design team identifies, we'll again do that post-meeting vote. We'll finalize a set of criteria, and then we will select a handful of the childcare management software systems that meet that criteria. We actually do Megan and I, how we organize it in this framework. Again, just one way to think about it. We do the demos outside of our co-design team meetings, and any co-design team member any member can volunteer to attend the demo. So we don't sit through all of our meetings through all the demos, because it actually takes quite a bit of time. It takes at least an hour per demo, if not a little bit more for discussion. So in Oregon's case, I think we did 4 or 5 demos, and Austin likely will do 4. So again, establish that criteria, select the childcare management software systems that meet the criteria, schedule a demo outside of the co-design team meetings, vote, kind of have a list of questions, and have a process that supports the provider, the co-design teams identify and choose their childcare management software system, and then make that recommendation to the co-design team, bring it back. I'm going to pause and just because I feel like I've been talking a lot, I just want to check in. Any questions that you have before I move into the next few meetings? Okay. Keep thinking. Okay, let's move into coaching. One of the other core kind of decisions of the co-design team framework. Let's see. So in this conversation, we want to start brainstorming and defining essential core services and skills that the Shared Services Alliance coaches will need to have. As most of you know, this is not, in the research we did not find a lot of childcare business coaching accessible and available. Matter of fact, when I think back to 25 years ago, when I was a director at, you attend conferences, you need to go to training, you need your training hours. The majority was focused on early childhood development. I actually don't have any memory or recollection of any conversation around business. It might have been there, but 25 years ago, it wasn't to my memory, or I didn't see it. So this is not a plethora of supports that exist in across, I would say, the states I'm familiar with. So some of the core questions, essential questions we would work with the design team are, what are the core skills needed that really will support a provider managed to the iron triangle? We talk about the iron triangle: full fee collection, full enrollment, ensuring revenue covers costs. What are the skills of a coach needed to support a provider do that? And then also that will support them access and use that childcare management software system. What skills, characteristics does a coach need in order to do that? Some of the examples that surface that we're starting to see some trends are sort of a coach having relational skills, but then also a coach having technical skills, or a set of coaches, access to a set of coaches that have technical skills. So relational skills, you all know this. Trusting, have the ability to develop trusting relationships, the ability to form authentic relationships. It was clearly said just a couple of weeks ago, a coach who can actually come sit with a provider and be patient and not expect me to know everything that I'm supposed to know, who just sit and walk me through it, who understands the challenge that I'm having. Technical skills might be understanding childcare business, understanding how to market a childcare business, or having access to a set of specialized skill sets like accounting or HR or legal. And maybe, we know that one coach may not have them all. That's kind of what we start calling a unicorn. However, so what are the functions and skills you need in a network of coaches that are going to support providers? So then we talk a little bit about what are the differences and similarities between shared services business coaching and quality improvement coaching. There's some similarities, but there's also a lot of unique differences. And then we also talk a little bit about, does this workforce already exist in your region, in your community, or do you need to build it? Or where can you access it? And where does it make most sense for the role for your coaches to be employed or housed? In Oregon, it made sense for the coaches to be housed at the childcare resource and referrals who are already in relationship with the childcare providers. Not all states have those. We also established that community-based organizations in existing relationships with childcare providers could also house a coach. In particular, community-based organizations serving diverse populations. Other states don't have that. And so that's just a question you have to figure out, where does it make most sense? And this is a question we talked with the co-design team about. So again, learning materials, Opportunities Exchange has some great coaching companions for center and family childcare, has some great outline of what coaches can do with providers. And then I like to throw in other resources where possible. So International Coaching Federation, ICF, that's a certifying organization for coaches of all sectors, not specific to early childhood. I like to bring in some of those core competencies of what a skilled coach does. Okay, and then again, post-meeting, we'll have the co-design team vote on your set of criteria and where the coaches should be housed and employed. All right. Meeting 5, we sort of finalize the coaching structure, the characteristics, where they'll be housed. And then we start developing a structure for the pilot, honing in on which providers are you first going to start with, or which providers would benefit the most from participating in the Shared Services Alliance. Start talking about the value proposition. Why should someone become part of the Alliance? What is it? What's that sound like? What does it mean? talk about provider criteria for participation if you want to establish that. And if you want to have provider fees or what that might look like. So again, core questions would be, having a brainstorm discussion, small group discussion on who are the ideal providers that would benefit. In Oregon, it was very clear to focus on smaller programs, family childcare programs, and small to mid-sized centers, just recognizing those typically are the most fragile economically in the childcare system. And that's who they decided. What's the value proposition offering to providers? What will change if the providers, for providers as a result of being part of the alliance? So we start talking about it. What do you want them to change? What's the value? What criteria do you think is important for a provider to be eligible? If any. And when or should providers pay a fee? All right, meeting six, recruitment and marketing. Start developing a plan for how you're going to recruit and market to that particular provider group that you just identified. How's it best to reach providers in the region? Who's best at reaching providers in your region? Who's the messenger? And where can you reach out and communicate to providers about the value of Shared Services Alliance? We really focused in on, we looked at a couple examples, Maryland Boost. We talked, somebody here is from Maryland, and they were piloting, they were starting about the same time Oregon was. And so they were very kind to share their marketing materials for their particular pilots that they started. So just as learning materials, when we work with groups, that was just an example we found and appreciated. Oregon's now got some that they've developed, and then again, opportunities exchange, looking at some sample value propositions and marketing campaigns material. All right, running down here. Meeting 7, finalizing the pilot structure and the governance. So we finalized thinking about how the providers can really succeed financially in this pilot structure, accessing both not only getting full fee collection, but also full fee collection of public dollars. We start spending some time clarifying roles and functions within the Shared Services Alliance, including the hub, the backbone organization, the coaches, and the childcare management software system, mapping out roles and responsibilities, because it gets super confusing for providers once they start entering into it. Getting really clear on who's doing what's their role. You can see here the questions here. Okay. And then lastly, checking our work. There's also some wiggle room in here because there are additional conversations that will emerge, as you know, when you start a code, when you're working with a group of people. But at the end, just really looking back over the previous 7 meetings, making sure the whole framework comes together. I will share that after each decision point, after each criteria is developed and voted on and approved, we map it into a proposal, into a report. So each one of these meetings is like step 1, commitment to vision, coaching criteria, CCMS criteria plus recommendation. What were the other ones? Recruitment and marketing, who's your target audience? What are the core services of your alliance? Pulling it all together, making sure it all comes together, sharing it with a group at the end, and making sure that it matches what the co-design teams shared and did over the previous work. Okay, that's the framework. What questions do you have?
How much time are between the meetings?
We like to organize it every 2 weeks. I know some people like to do it every month. Megan and I are doing every 2 weeks just because it keeps you moving. And then you have it done in a 3-month period of time, 2 to 3 month period of time. So it's time, call it time constraint, something like that. You know what that means? Yeah.
There's a question from the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is, how rigid was this process? I imagine this could easily become cyclical
wanting to revisit previous decisions as we make new ones?
Yeah, it's really true. That's such a great question. Because often when groups start coming to make a decision, there becomes this decision fear, and you start pulling back. And I think that's why the value of having brainstorm, vote electronically, come back together, approve. So there's multiple approval points. I would say not rigid at all. I mean, rigid, this is a guide, I would say, and not rigid because in order to truly be adaptive and responsive to your leaders, you need to respond to requests, questions, needs. And so if we need to spend a little more time revisiting a decision because, hey, you know, a month ago, I didn't know what I know now, and I'm worried. Let's say a month ago, I said, yeah, providers are gonna pay, we want them to pay $300 a month for this. Okay, a month later, I don't think that's gonna be realistic. Okay, let's revisit it, you know. So in order to be responsive, you have to be adaptive. And at the same time, there's a value in having these multiple points of decision-making. Approval, I'll say. And again, we come back to the final approval at the end. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Could you share with us any of the most effective strategies for sort of identifying and then assembling that kind of dream co-design team? So in the co-design team, there were, we actually leaned on the child care resource and referrals for reaching out to the providers who they were already in relationship with to be part of the co-design team. So typically, again, going to sort of the people who are already in relationship. And you easily could go to provider groups. I think some of the CCRNRs went to provider groups, or a provider went to a provider group, and they had a discussion around who wanted to engage. We spent a little time making sure we had some leadership from the state. It's valuable to sort of have some of your decision-making, institutional decision-making with providers on the ground and coming together in co-design. So I would consider institutional decision-making some of the state leaders as well as CCRNRs. I think so. Again, it's sort of dependent on the sponsors and how they want to structure the group. Yeah.
I was just wondering, did you find a need to orient people around co-designing or liberatory or human-centered designing before you actually got started? And then my secondary question is, would you make a recommendation for an equity tool that you use? These are just things that I'm coming across as we've been doing this.
Yeah, great. In this particular case, I've been involved in processes that have kind of done a design kind of orientation. In this particular work, we use the scope and sequence. So exactly this 8-meeting framework, we have it mapped out and we walk through with providers early on.
Okay.
Or the co-design team early on. In another particular process, and it'll show up in a facilitation tip, we are pulling the providers together before we start the design work. So providers can come to be in relationship with each other and are affirmed how critical their voice is in the design. So there's a couple of different things that, and I think when we talk about our commitments in the beginning to what we need from each other, we really try to emphasize the co-design, co-creation. That's the intent of our work together. So I don't know if that answers your question. The equity tool, Oregon has an equity lens, and we often pull key questions from that. There are some really great equity lens tools out there.
We have one in Washington. It's
yeah.
just, I'll say not as practice friendly. We've made adaptations to it with the CCRNRs and yeah, so I was wondering what else to use.
Yeah, we often will pull a couple questions out of it that we really want to center people in.
So, you know, because a big tool is like a little overwhelming sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So when you were looking for the providers, you went over the qualities and characteristics that you were looking for part of this design team. Did you have an application process? You mentioned that the resource and referrals kind of pointed you towards people, but that lends itself to a selection as opposed to an,
Sure.
you know, so I didn't know if you used any kind of a provider tool or what.
I've seen it done both ways. In Oregon, we didn't. We leaned on the child resource and referral. Yeah, in other communities, I have seen a different process, actually, almost like having a community forum and then inviting people who are interested to come forward. So that's another way to kind of identify people, share a little bit about this, who's interested, who'd like to come forward, or some kind of an activity. Yeah.
You don't have a formal application of
We
any
did not.
sort.
We did not in this particular case. Yeah, good, great question.
Wondering if you, when you scaled this up statewide, did you find any like increased needs or barriers for regions?
So it hasn't scaled statewide. It's in process. And yes, matter of fact, even the 3 pilots, there are a lot of barriers that are emerging and that require really responsive and adaptive leadership. Matter of fact, I'm still integrally involved in supporting the Oregon process. And it's a conversation we have. As a matter of fact, the backbone Mira leader is here and our director is somewhere here. Was here. Yes, there you go. Right, sitting right next to you. Yes, I'm sure they can talk for hours about the barriers. And I would just say that there is significant intention on being responsive and adaptive quickly, as quickly as possible, because this is for supports for providers. That's what it's about.
I think my question coming here is the reality of shared services. I'm in New Hampshire and we have like our SELA, they have the website, you know, in Vermont, they pay for them to have the website access to all of this. And the centers that are at that 100+ capacity have an executive director, do all of this, they have back office system, but below that, if you have that teaching director, they do not access any of this. They do not have the time. And so it seems like there's like a significant step, and it doesn't matter where we are in our regions, in New Hampshire or Vermont, that access piece of time seems to be the kicker barrier that we can't seem to figure out.
That's a barrier. I mean, I'm sure you could affirm. Yeah, it is a barrier. And that's part of what, part of the challenge, I think. Articulating the value add, somebody being able to see the benefit quickly for doing short baby steps to improve their business practices. And in Oregon's context, the centers have to be under 100. They actually have to be 75 or young or smaller, just because it kind of targets that infrastructure a little bit differently. They don't have the same infrastructure that larger do. But regardless of, time is an issue. It is. It's a very.
Another question from the chat. Any tips for keeping co-builders engaged in the process long-term? We had a lot of folks interested in the beginning and then get busy. We've offered credit and financial incentives, but long-term engagement has been a challenge.
You know, that's a great point. And I think that's probably one reason we structured the design every 2 weeks so that it was a short time limited commitment. And when we had providers paid, they were paid half up front and half at the end. And there was a requirement to attend 7 out of the 10 meetings. That's the Oregon model. Beyond that, for governance, ongoing governance and engagement, we do have an advisory body that the co-design team sort of morphed into an advisory body for governance that meets quarterly. And I think that there's still some learning on how to truly access and utilize an advisory body over the structure. But that is challenging. So just, I don't know if those are some helpful tips on how we approached it.
May I ask what compensation you offered to the co-design team?
Yeah. So for childcare providers, they were offered $5,000 for 10 meetings with substantial. That's probably another tip. Half up front, half at the end of the 10 meeting sequence. They could volunteer additional time for the demos, the childcare management software demos, which a large amount of them did. And then they also were asked to do the surveys in between. So we paid them like we would pay a consultant. It was a commitment we had from the beginning. And some childcare resource and referrals needed some additional support, but not many. What interests you? What gives you pause?
Framework's super helpful. So thank you. The scope and sequence.
Yeah.
I think when we do this work, sometimes it gets too ambiguous because you want to really honor the transforming of the power dynamics, especially when you're coming with community and really giving them the decision to push forward. We're working on something similar, but for workforce compensation and having providers come up with their own legislative policy for advocates to take forward versus advocates coming up with it.
Right.
So it's a new thing. We're looking at the compensation and it's just helpful to just have a frame.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that because at least we could get some parameter guardrails around how to hold the sessions.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah. Let me pop through facilitation tips and then let's talk about what might be helpful for you. Okay. This may seem really basic, common sense, and I think it's important to center in some of those basic common sense themes at times, remind ourselves. When we think about facilitating a process such as this, where people are coming together to design collaboratively, as a facilitator, as a designer, I'm very intentional about my role. And it's hard because, I mean, I told you I have a history in this work. I'm gonna try to get this out of the way. Okay. So the role as a facilitator is really to provide a structure and a process rather than directions or answers, so that you're really drawing on that group member expertise. Again, going back to that Brene Brown leadership definition, create a structure and a process rather than directions or questions or answers, or being that person with all the answers and knowing. And so the role is really to manage the process and stay neutral about the content. Sometimes you need to offer some additional information, but again, really centering on managing the process and staying neutral about the content. So instead of offering opinions, instead of promoting a point of view, instead of making decisions, really creating that process and structure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So in following that methodology, did you ever feel like you were heading down a wrong path, that the kind of consensus approach was not going to come up with the right answers and you felt like you needed to steer the group, or were you comfortable with?
I think because we anchored it to criteria that they established.
Okay.
So we weren't kind of out here ambiguously, we were anchored to a criteria that we all agreed upon. And the criteria was solid, you know. So I think, you know, there are moments where there are conversations because there's so much frustration that we all hold in the early childhood system. There are moments where, gosh, we need to change licensing regulations and we need to advocate for policy changes or funding. And so we start just sort of going, well, let's talk about what we can control. What is in our control that the Alliance can solve for? What is in our control that you want the Alliance to solve for? What's out of our control? And what might the Alliance still actually help solve for that? So take, for example, the pandemic shut down and it impacted enrollment. what can an alliance do that might support programs get back up to full enrollment if they're struggling and not quite there yet? What can an alliance do to support all the programs in that alliance? No, we can't manage the control of shutdown and regulations that change it, but what can the alliance do to support that problem? Because it's a real problem. So that's, I would say, where we spend some time sometimes. Okay. Following on tips, tips for engaging providers, really lifting up provider voice. We talked a little bit about this, reaching out one-on-one before and between meetings to affirm inexperienced wisdom. This is something that both Megan and I did. We would sort of split up who's going to call provider, this provider, and let's check in with them every couple meetings and just really see if there's any additional insights and wisdom that they want to share, concerns, questions. You could hold a group meeting with providers before to support relationships. We talked about that. During co-design team meetings, just some tips, some small things to shake up, to really engage individuals. Pair share, doing one-on-ones, doing small groups of 3 to 5. Try not to go much bigger than 5. Just really to encourage that participation from each member. You can always do round robins, sharing one by one all the way around your group. And popcorn style, of course, inviting sharing and participation. Again, some common sense tools, but I wanted to just check in with you about what approaches you found effective to create space for providers to actively engage and lead. Is there anything else you would want to share with the group?
We've taken advantage of Padlets, Jamboard, Padlet, those types of things online, because all of our meetings are virtual since we're covering. Our co-design team is all across the state. And so we utilize that in order to, it helps us capture ideas and capture information. So it's really great versus note taking where you may have to shorthand something. It's in their own voice, but then it's a chance for them to see it and respond to it as well.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. One thing I really like about Jamboard is you can do the sticky notes just like you're in a room, but it's anonymous. So you can put anything on a sticky note without being, which can create safety for people to feel comfortable in putting something forward. Yeah, I've started using it a lot more.
Could you repeat that suggestion? The folks online couldn't hear you very well.
I apologize. Wow, I've never had that before. Very loud. So Padlet or Jamboard. So Padlet, Padlet. And what's nice about that is versus some other programs, nothing against Jamboard, but there's no login needed. You don't have to create an account. Everybody can just go to it. But that was a way to kind of, like, again, it's anonymous, but for people to be able to see, you can upvote, put hearts. I mean, we love liking things, don't we? That's Facebook is all about, Twitter. So you get hearts and suggestions and such, and that way you can kind of weigh some different comments as well.
Yeah.
Did they hear that one? You guys all hear that?
That was better, thank you. And then another question, you described 8 meetings, but said providers had to attend 7 of 10.
Oh, that was the Oregon model. Yeah.
Okay.
We just mapped out, I shared with you today an 8 meeting framework. The Oregon framework had 10 because they had some additional decisions to make in theirs.
Okay.
So my apologies for that.
But if you didn't make those, you missed out on meetings, were they taped or were they provided online or how, like?
Sometimes, and that's a great suggestion, actually. If you get permission from all of your co-design team, it can be really valuable to record them. And we were not always, I'll just say it honestly, I have not been consistent in that, but there are times where there's really an important decision and we make sure that it's recorded.
Okay.
Yeah. The demos were all recorded. Because many providers were not able to attend all of those and they really wanted to see them. So that was one that there was agreement that all of those would be recorded. Yeah. Great. Sorry for that lack of clarity. And again, this is a framework. You can do 8, you can do 10, you can do 12. It sort of depends on how long you're meeting, what your decisions are that you need to make. In Oregon, they had an additional decision of selecting a backbone organization. That was a big decision. And that took some additional outside meetings in addition to the framework. So it just depends on your community needs, what your goals are, what your needs are, what your resources are, what you want to accomplish.
the next online question is, what happens after the meeting process? What are the next steps?
So again, this is a framework of a design. And so it depends on this, on the organizing sponsors. In Oregon, funding had to be secured. Funding was not secured at the end of the framework. So the proposal that Megan and I put together that pulled all these decision points together went to the Oregon Community Foundation, the Fort Family Foundation. They agreed to fund it, thankfully, the launch of 3 pilots. And then we pitched it to the Early Learning Division and they agreed to fund the coaching role. And some of the childcare management software licenses. It depends on where you are in the process. If you have funding secured, then you can actually, most people have to hire staff. Oregon had to hire a director. Most have to hire a staff. If a staff is already brought on board, then you move into implementation planning. You move into implementation. You start developing your marketing materials, your value proposition. You identify your target providers and you've got your coaches lined up. You know, you start getting your resources and infrastructure built to launch the alliance. That's just kind of off the top of my head. Some of the things. Yeah.
So when you say 3 pilots, you're talking about 3 different alliances?
Great. In Oregon's case, though, they're part of one alliance, one backbone in 3 pilot regions.
Okay, so 3 locations.
Yeah,
essentially.
throughout the state.
Okay.
Yeah. All starting to build.
I thought maybe there were 3 different types of alliances that they were doing.
Yeah, but that's that model. You easily could design a framework for 3 different alliances. I mean.
I was just thinking about
Yeah.
geographically in Pennsylvania, like in most states, you know, I mean, we've got on both sides of our state, we've got these very robust areas, and then we've got the middle of the state that's got SIPO.
Yeah.
You know, and they've got nothing, they've got no resources, and the alliance would look different
Yeah,
in those particular areas. So that's why I was asking the question.
yeah, that's a really good point. The challenge, yeah. Yeah.
How long, in your experience, do you need to kind of run your network until you start to see some outcomes that you can report back to your funder, or you can demonstrate that you have a successful model?
So that's getting a little out of my wheelhouse.
What is the successful model?
That's a great question. I think that's part of why we're here. You know, my personal work it hasn't been going on enough, you know, and I think this is, it's a little out of my wheelhouse to answer. I think that's part of one reason we're here. Yeah.
Do you have an ongoing role or is your job done with Oregon?
I smile at my Oregon team here. Megan and I have provided some implementation consultation and facilitation. And we're scaling back, scale back. And we're here to support the success of our team. And whatever that might look like. Like any kind of consulting initiative, you're asked to do a specific project, and then sometimes you're asked to do a different project, but yeah.
Have you come across the challenge of engaging providers with different languages and having multiple languages represented on the co-design team?
So we only started on the co-design team with providers who speak Spanish. We did not go broader in the initial design, in the ones that I've been involved with. And you easily could.
And you had English and Spanish in the same co-design team.
The Spanish, there was an individual who now is a coach. There were 2 who led Spanish-speaking cohorts. And so actually it was really valuable to have their participation because they could consult with their cohorts in between processes. So it was sort of like, that's where it's nice to have providers who are part of other groups, because they can consult other groups throughout the decision-making process. And that was really a useful process. I will add that the co-design team, part of their criteria, some of the criteria we often hear around childcare management software systems is a criteria around ensuring that there are is available in languages other than English. So that's a question that was part of the interview process.
Can you follow up with that childcare management software piece and the challenges of signing on the correct one for the group?
Yeah, that's typically one of the bigger decisions. And I think that's where really rounding in the criteria of what's important to the co-design team is essential, because then you can come back to it. And the criteria actually automatically eliminated many, because many childcare management software systems didn't have all the criteria that the co-design team said was really important. And so having that criteria really made a big difference in being able to anchor back to that. That's a lot. That answered your question.
I always think in our case, there's firms that have existing platforms in place, or they're part of a bigger organization that has something in place, and that seems to be such a barrier for us.
Yeah, and it is a barrier. I think that's something that's the current navigation to figure out how to support providers who maybe have an existing system. Those who were funded in the Alliance who didn't have to pay anything were, in the Oregon model, it's the funding pays for the childcare management software license. And so it's sort of tied to that connection, but it's being talked about right now because many providers need business coaching. Providers need other supports. And so it's just, again, being adaptive and responsive, trying to innovate as you go forward so that you're responsive to what the needs of our providers are. So.
I just wanted to, excuse my voice, I'm from Texas, but this Austin weather is killing me. Horrible. I just wanted to segue on what you said about the providing the services in another language. So I am from El Paso, Texas, but I'm part of Avance, which is in San Antonio, Texas. And we're currently serving the 4,108 home child care providers across the state of Texas. And so my current position, I'm supporting 19 business coaches. I was glad you brought that up. 19 business coaches across the state of Texas. And so what I learned was I have to have those that speak another language. So what I did initially back in August was I hired 75% Spanish speaking, because I'm thinking it's Texas, I'm from El Paso, we're gonna need Spanish speaking. Guess what happened? Vietnamese. And I was like, oh. And then a couple called in and we're Avance, we meet you where you're at. You can have services in any language you want. Farsi. Oh my gosh. So we've now hired a translation service that we keep on board. And so what happens is like the coach will get on, they'll find out, oh, it's Farsi, it's French, it's whatever that I didn't think of because I thought Spanish. And so now we have someone from Masterwork who's out of Houston, more coordinating, right? From out of Houston who actually get on the calls so that they can have those one-on-one calls and do translation services for them. Once we started doing that, literally the coaches, providers, they had like maybe 8 to 12 providers per coach. It's now at like 30, but it's that they know that, well, I can get it in any language I want. I can speak English, but here's my preferred. Can you guys do it? Sure, we can. Now it's whatever language you want, but let me get on that server to make sure someone will get on with them. So it is an option. It's just, it's a lot of work, takes a lot of coordination. And I'm not scratching.
Okay, what is your name in case people?
Jocelyn Brandt from Avance
Okay, Jocelyn from Avante in Texas.
in Texas.
Resource.
Yes.
Are you gathering data on what types of issues those business coaches are covering with? Like
Absolutely. So I will share with you, our data is being collected by Texas Policy Lab out of Rice University.
Wow. So,
And so what you were talking about, the meetings every 2 weeks, we went from monthly to bi-weekly meetings to now we have meetings every Monday. Every Monday. And so we've even separated those to where it's just kind of like that qualitative data type thing, one day out of the week. And then now certain Wednesdays we meet again and it's just a data meeting. And that's all we talk about for a whole entire hour. Yeah, so it is being collected. Yes.
That's amazing.
It's a lot of work, but it's amazing.
That's
It's amazing.
awesome.
And we're doing this through the Texas Workforce Commission, that's who's funding us, so.
We're gonna ask.
We're gonna ask who's funding it, yeah, Texas Workforce Commission, we just got a slight approval for our second year, and it went up to $2.4 billion. So it's gonna be huge next year, based off that data that we collected, and we're able to report back from just last year.
Is that gonna be talked about in the session this evening?
Well, my CEO is over in 1%, right now.
Maybe later, or later.
So I'm not sure. She's gonna talk about that.
So,
We're all chattering because we know you go big and that.
I love it. So, one last question I have for you all. First of all, if you have any other things you'd like to share, or you have questions, please feel free to look it up. Is there anything that Opportunities Exchange, Louise has asked me to ask you all, is there anything that would be helpful to you all that Opportunities Exchange could support or create or develop to provide and share some of the co-design, the framework, the designing framework? Is there anything that'd be helpful to you? What was that?
So you could get my state to figure out it's not while doing state law.
Okay, I hear you on that one. Let me make sure I've got my question here. Yeah, that was just a question Louise had wanted to ask. Or if you have any other questions too.
I do have one suggestion.
Yeah.
Talked to Lisa now,
Yeah,
because everybody's in the same position. I'm guessing a lot of people in here who don't have 2 point something billion dollars.
yeah,
We're all coming to see you.
yeah.
Is
Yeah.
the sales pitch for shared services to legislators and government types.
Yep, let me take notes of that.
Because it's one thing we talk to ourselves about is.
You bet.
Right.
Yeah.
A very different demographic.
Yep.
So how do you put something together that you don't have to reinvent that?
Yep.
from scratch?
Yep. You know, it's funny to me, it's not necessarily legislators, but I have been in multiple facilitated dialogues around this. The people I find who get shared services fastest are business leaders.
Well, yeah.
Because we do that all the time. We do it through this and we do, and it's been a helpful advocate.
Outsourcing.
Right. So anyways, but that's a great suggestion. I make a note of the sales pitch for legislators, policymakers. Yeah,
We'll talk to the governor. The governor's staff.
exactly. Yeah.
What do they need?
Yep. Right.
So Heidi, there's another question. This framework sounds wonderful. Is there consultation support available in implementing it?
Opportunities
Get your
Exchange.
I don't even work there, but.
I would definitely say reach out to Opportunities Exchange.
Okay.
And don't ever, because I'm a private consultant, but I'm here on behalf of Opportunities Exchange. in
Right.
Support of Opportunities Exchange.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, reach out to OpEx. They have lots of support. They're great. So, anything else be helpful that could be supportive to you all and that Opportunities Exchange could provide for you? Sales pitch, consultation, clarity. Okay.
I would love to know if anyone has been, what it looks like to, that whole piece about time. You know, that I'm still talking like that mid to small size center that doesn't have the time to access any of this that we're advocating for at the state level. To get money. So I'm wondering if anyone has figured that out specifically to, I mean, our thinking is finding time in a director's life.
Yeah.
Is convincing them, especially a private legal center, to join a back office up, to offload or outsource. I say it offload because it goes off the desk. All of the collections and not just the software, but an accountant, a bookkeeper who does all the collections, all of that piece. Maybe the business coaching becomes how to read a P&L instead of how to, I mean, I don't know. I have to use QuickBooks for our organization and I call the account like 16 times.
Sure.
Yeah. Still, she just fixed it. Yeah. So I guess like that's the piece that convincing them what that looks like, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
That's kind of each one of our regions in our state is specifically wanting that piece. That this power by piece is like, it's a great idea, but I don't know how to run my password for the website.
No kidding. Yeah,
I was in Pennsylvania, we actually had that, that was an issue for us for a while. The only people, we have a shared service platform, we have the CCA Global platform, customized, fully customized with our state standards and things. And the thing that made the difference was when we were able to show people the equals dollars, right? When they saw time equals money, they started to be like, oh, wait a minute. And so there is a tool on Exchange that shows the dollar value of, creation of a handbook, all of those types of things. When we were down and dirty and said to a director, okay, what is it that you need? What do you need done? And then calculated the time it takes to do that and put that back into translation for them. It was like,
I still think, because we've been pitched that, and it comes to scale. Those YMCA's are raking in the dollars, shared services, the center with 50 kids, and not tap enough of it to pay for it, and the time. And I mean, as
oh, you
a
mean for
director,
them to pay for,
we had, ours is $2,400 a year.
oh, you're talking about for your platform.
Yeah, for any size center. So to recoup 2,400, and I live on the Canadian border, the people that they were contracting for oil were 2 hours away.
Okay, so you're not necessarily, so you were thinking about the money equaling time doesn't matter to them because they don't see the value in that because the time isn't there to begin with, and they're purchasing the platform, so to speak.
I guess what I'm saying is shared services isn't just the platform.
No,
It's like, I really would like to see just the back office piece, just that piece pulled out. And of course, my thinking is the back office piece, we could train those people for us and say, gee, did you know this center's got a deal, maybe we can power it that way. But I just think to find that time as a director for 20 years, I should have outsourced my bookkeeping.
yeah, right.
I would have done so much better.
I think in our case, when I first came to these years ago, I was so overwhelmed because there was the whole package and the way everybody did it. And when I finally realized in Tennessee that let's just start with something. We're part of the community foundation, so we had some funding sources. But we created a child care finder and we got the PC platform and we just started there. And now we added financial back office, we've added the sub-service and doing other things, thinking an alliance and that whole package. But don't try to do it all, just start.
Yeah, they want to, there's no biting on the platform, spending a ton of money in our state, offering the platform for free and Vermont too. What they really want is the back office piece, but we're not even.
so even finding the funds to be able to offer it to them free to get them to even see that they need to do it is probably an issue.
I mean, there's only so many manuals you need, but what they really need is to become better business people. And we, in Coos County, northernmost in New Hampshire, I was part of a business of childcare. We did this full 2-year pilot training, and I still can't read the feeling. I wanted to do the program again, thinking maybe I just didn't get it the first time. It didn't stick. I have a master's in early childhood. I'm not an accountant.
Yeah.
And what we should have done now that we've learned, and we were offered it free, the platform for free, was that we should have offered the bookkeeping, the back office piece, because that's what we needed.
Right.
And then figure out what the platform fits in. But that's what has anyone done it? Can you show me?
I guess in this context, we're talking about designs. And if listening to it feels like there's a need for maybe a redesign of kind of what's offered. And that's actually a conversation even underway with Lisa as our director, is constantly thinking about, we have to redesign some things that maybe aren't working, or that providers need now that maybe they didn't need 5 years ago. Kind of, they didn't back up what you're saying, yes. But it's sounding like there's a need maybe for redesign. Okay, other questions, reactions, reflections, sharings, offerings, celebrations? Okay, team, we'll take a little bit of time, an extra 7 minutes.
Oh, we have one more question.
Oh,
Would you mention, when you mentioned redesign, would you use the same process?
probably, so the process is, so there's nothing really magical about the process, I would say. The process is it's an approach designed around certain decision-making. So here's what I would probably do, is I would look at what are the key decisions that need to be looked at? What are the revisits? What are the pain points? What are the successes? Where do you need to revisit key things? And then create an approach. I think the approach is really a facilitation approach, which is pull people together, create shared commitments around your work together, your shared vision, and revisit those decision-making points. And I do like to use the process of what's our criteria for making this decision and what are the options that we can choose from. So you could easily adapt it, I'll say. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, and I just sort of inflecting my own thoughts into it. A lot of what it seems like needs to be redesigned is more the priorities as opposed to like, because you can't do everything at the same time first. But you may have decided that, oh, that's not working so well to start with that. So let's flip this on its head and try it, in a different order so that we're getting more early wins and people are willing to engage because they're getting something of value from it. But you got to keep trying, there's no easy answers because we are dealing with a population that is just so busy and fried. But you have to give them some things that actually make their lives easier and try to get those early wins.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would also add, I just want to put one more quick thing on the table. The notion of an evaluation is, I would say, lacking in this work, but it's critical. It's something that Oregon Community Foundation funded for Oregon. You've got it going for the work you're doing in Texas. That gives you an outside neutral evaluator to highlight, this is what's working great. This is not working at all. Time to readjust. And so that enables you to be responsive and quick to make changes quickly. So you don't get too far down the road and something's not working right. So if we didn't put that in here, but that is something I would always support. So you can be adaptive. All right, everyone, be well. Best of luck to you. Thank you for being here today. Thanks for sharing.